What does it mean to live on a planet and know only its skin? Most of us move through the days as if the world were finished at street level. We measure life by skylines, coastlines, tree lines, the visible edge of things. We trust the horizon because it comforts us. It suggests that what matters can be seen in daylight. But below the pavement, below the roots, below the weight of memory itself, another earth has always existed in silence. It is an earth of chambers and passages, of pressure and patience, a place where stone remembers what people forget. Whole landscapes have formed there without an audience. Rivers have traveled in darkness for ages. Cities have hidden from violence. Ice has grown like architecture. Crystals have taken shape in perfect stillness, untouched by history, until a lamp beam found them and made them suddenly real. What is most striking is not simply that these places exist. It is that they have existed beside us all along. Beneath crowded capitals and empty deserts, beneath farms, mountains, and forests, there are rooms no map once admitted, thresholds opened by accident, and worlds so large or intricate that the first people to enter them struggled to name what they were seeing. This is not a story about monsters below ground or myths waiting to be confirmed. It is a story about human scale meeting geological time, about ingenuity pressed into rock, about fear, refuge, devotion, and wonder, and about the humbling truth that the planet is always deeper than our imagination. So let us go down carefully, not to escape the surface, but to understand it. Because sometimes the clearest way to see who we are is to descend into the places where sunlight never learned to stay. What remains of a city after the people are gone? Sometimes it is not a ruin in the open air, but a platform lit by old bulbs somewhere beneath the rush of modern life. A tiled wall, a station sign, a bench no one has touched in decades. The surface keeps moving, impatient and loud, while below it certain places remain suspended in the last breath of their own era. In New York, London, and Berlin, there are stations that once promised movement and now preserve stillness. They were built for crowds, for ambition, for futures imagined in steel and stone. Some were elegant showpieces dressed in arches and glazed tiles, as if public transit itself were a kind of civic cathedral. Others were practical, quickly built, then quietly abandoned when the city changed course above them. And cities always do change course. A new line opens, a border hardens, a war redraws purpose. What once welcomed commuters begins to serve another life entirely. In London, disused stations became shelters and command posts during bombing raids, spaces where ordinary transit was transformed by necessity into refuge. In Berlin, division turned some platforms into ghostly thresholds, places trains crossed but could not touch, where passengers glimpsed empty stations guarded by history itself. In New York, beauty survived in secret beneath a system too busy to stop and look back. There is something haunting in that survival, not because these places are eerie in the theatrical sense, but because they reveal how quickly human intention becomes archaeology. A station can be abandoned in one generation and rediscovered in the next, as if it belonged to another civilization. The tiles remain, the curves remain. Even the silence has structure. Perhaps that is why such spaces move us. They remind us that progress does not erase what came before, it simply builds over it. And beneath every confident present, there may still be an older dream waiting in the dark, asking whether a city ever truly forgets itself. How far will human beings go to remain unseen? In the countryside northwest of what is now Ho Chi Minh City, the earth once became a strategy. Not a symbol, not a metaphor, but a literal way of surviving a war fought with overwhelming force. Above ground, machines thundered through the sky, fire fell from aircraft. Roads and fields were watched, measured, targeted. Yet below that violence, hidden in clay and darkness, another world was being built by hand. The Cucci tunnels were not merely escape routes. They formed an underground network of endurance. Narrow passages linked kitchens, infirmaries, supply rooms, sleeping quarters, and meeting spaces where decisions were made in whispers while danger moved overhead. It was a landscape shaped by patience more than power. Every meter represented labor, risk, and a precise understanding of what the land itself could conceal. To enter those tunnels was to enter a different scale of life. The body had to shrink. Light vanished almost immediately. Air became close and heavy. The walls pressed inward. For those who lived there, the tunnels were protection, burden, workplace, shelter, and psychological trial all at once. For those sent to pursue them underground, they became a place where military advantage lost much of its meaning. Technology could dominate the surface and still fail to master what had been carved quietly beneath it. That is part of what gives Kuchi its lasting force. It reveals that ingenuity is not always grand in appearance. Sometimes it is low to the ground, muddy, exhausting, and nearly invisible. Sometimes survival depends not on conquering space, but on learning how little of it a person truly needs. Today, preserved sections allow visitors to glimpse that subterranean world, but only as an echo. The full reality belonged to people who adapted to conditions few of us can imagine. And perhaps that is the deeper question the tunnels leave behind. When history closes in from every side, what hidden strength does a human being discover in order to keep going? Can a town choose the earth as shelter and still call it home? In the South Australian outback, the light can feel merciless. It does not simply illuminate the land, it bears down on it. The horizon around Coober Pedy seems almost stripped to its essentials, a pale expanse of dust, rock, and heat where trees are rare, shade is precious, and summer can turn the open air into something punishing. At first glance, it looks like a place people would pass through, not a place they would stay. And yet they stayed. They stayed because opal drew them there in the early 20th century, shimmering with the promise that beauty could be extracted from hardship. And as miners cut into the earth searching for that color trapped in stone, they discovered something else. The underground offered a different climate, a different rhythm, almost a different philosophy of living. While the surface burned, the excavated rooms below held steady, cool in the fierce months and warm when desert nights turned sharp. So a town took shape where many of its homes could not be seen from the road. Bedrooms, kitchens, chapels, hotels, gathering places, even ordinary routines of family life settled into carved spaces beneath the ground. These were not improvised shelters of desperation, but carefully made interiors, often graceful in their own quiet way, with smooth walls, arching ceilings, and the calm that comes from escaping a hostile sky. There is something deeply human in that adaptation. We often imagine home as a structure raised upward, something that announces itself against the horizon. Coober Pedy suggests another possibility. Home can also be an act of retreat into the earth, not from fear, but from wisdom. It can be a bargain with climate, a practical answer that becomes culture over time. And maybe that is what makes the town so memorable. It reminds us that human beings do not belong only to one kind of landscape. We belong, perhaps, to our capacity to listen when a place tells us how it must be inhabited. What if water could remember the world before us? Across the Yucatan Peninsula, the ground can appear deceptively calm. Jungle, stone, dry heat, and flat distance give little warning of what lies beneath. Then the earth opens without ceremony. A circle of blue appears among roots and limestone, clear enough to look unreal, as though a fragment of sky has slipped underground. These openings, known as cenotes, are not simply pools, they are thresholds. Below them stretches one of the most intricate hidden waterways on Earth, a submerged labyrinth of caves and underground rivers shaped over immense spans of time. Some chambers are open to daylight, ringed by vines and branches. Others are enclosed in darkness so complete that a diver's lamp seems less like illumination than a temporary argument against the unknown. The water is often astonishingly clear, turning stone columns and mineral curtains into a kind of underwater architecture. For the ancient Maya, these places were more than geological accidents. They were sacred crossings bound to ritual, necessity, and cosmology. Water meant survival in this limestone landscape, but it also meant contact with mystery. Offerings entered the cenotes. So did prayers, fears, and at times, human lives. In their depth, the practical and the spiritual met without contradiction. Modern exploration has changed the tools, not the feeling. Cave divers move through passages that split and narrow, through spaces beautiful enough to quiet thought and dangerous enough to end it. A misplaced fin can stir silt into blindness. A missed line can erase the way back. In such moments, all confidence becomes fragile, and the cave reasserts its ancient terms. That may be why notes linger in the imagination. They ask us to consider how thin the boundary is between discovery and reverence. We enter hoping to map, measure, and understand, yet what stays with us is often something less definable. The sense that beneath the familiar ground of daily life, there are still portals into older ways of seeing, where water is not merely water, but memory made visible. What does coal become when time is allowed to sculpt with perfect patience? High in the Austrian Alps, a mountain opens into a world that feels less discovered than dreamed. The entrance to Eisriesenwelt is severe and almost ceremonial, a threshold where wind slips in and out of stone as though the earth itself were breathing. Step beyond it, and the familiar logic of rock gives way to something stranger. Walls, floors, vaults, and chambers begin to gleam. Ice takes over the imagination. This is not the delicate frost of a winter window. It is monumental, architectural, and ancient in temperament. Over centuries, air and moisture have collaborated in darkness, building frozen curtains, ridges, columns, and slopes that seem composed by an artist with a taste for cathedrals. Light touches them, and they answer in pale blue and white, as if the cave were holding its own weather, its own season, independent from the world outside. Eisriesenwelt, the so-called world of the ice giants, reminds us that nature does not need haste to achieve grandeur. The cave extends deep into the mountain, far beyond what most visitors will ever see. Only a small portion is commonly entered, and even that is enough to unsettle proportion. Human beings arrive with lanterns, boots, and names for chambers, yet the larger formation remains indifferent to our labeling. It continues to shift, freeze, and breathe according to pressures far older than tourism or science. There is humility in that encounter. We often admire what has been built because building suggests intention, control, purpose. But here the magnificence comes from process alone. Air moved, water condensed, temperature held, time continued. And from that repetition emerged something that resembles design without ever having needed a designer. Perhaps that is why an ice cave leaves such a deep impression. It stands at the edge of comprehension, where beauty and physics become inseparable. And in that frozen stillness, one question quietly forms. How many masterpieces has the earth created simply because no one was there to interrupt it? Can labor become devotion simply by being repeated long enough in the dark? South of Krakow, beneath the ordinary movement of roads and villages, the Wieliczka Salt Mine descends through layers of earth like a memory cut into stone. For centuries, miners entered it not for wonder, but for work. Salt was necessity, wealth, preservation, survival. It flavored food, protected it from ruin, and carried the value of something people could not live without. What began as extraction slowly became something else. In chamber after chamber, the mine reveals an unexpected transformation. The same material that was cut from the walls for practical use became the medium for beauty. Corridors widened into halls, rough interiors gave way to chapels, altars, carvings, and reliefs shaped by hands that understood both exhaustion and reverence. Underground, far from daylight, laborers began leaving behind not only tunnels, but expressions of faith, gratitude, and endurance. The most remarkable spaces do not feel improvised. They feel composed. Salt chandeliers catch the light with a muted glow. Walls carry figures and scenes emerging from the mineral itself. Floors, stairways, and sanctuaries seem to insist that even in a place built around toil, the human spirit searches for ceremony. It is one thing to descend for work each day. It is another to shape that workplace into a sanctuary. That impulse says something enduring about us. Human beings rarely settle for utility alone. We build meaning into the places that demand the most from us. We decorate the difficult. We give form to gratitude in the midst of strain. In Wieliczka, generations of miners did more than endure the underground. They answered it with craft. And perhaps that is why the mine stays in the mind long after one leaves it. It is not merely an engineering feat, nor simply a historical curiosity. It is evidence that beauty often emerges where survival and imagination meet. In the deepest places, where the work is hardest, what do people choose to make sacred so they can continue? What if a cave were so large that nature began again inside it? In central Vietnam, dense jungle folds over the land with the confidence of something ancient and self-contained. Mist gathers in the trees, croissants. Rain disappears into limestone. From above, nothing announces that one of the largest hidden chambers on Earth lies below. The entrance, when finally found, did not look like the doorway to a world. It was simply a break in stone, half concealed, breathing cold air from the dark. That breath led to Son Doong. To call it a cave almost feels insufficient. Its main passage is so vast that familiar comparisons begin to fail. The space does not just surround a person, it overwhelms scale itself. Walls rise like cliffs, ceilings vanish into shadow. Sound changes inside such immensity. Footsteps become small, temporary things, and the human voice seems to realize almost at once that it is no longer the center of the scene. Then there is the light. In places where the roof collapsed long ago, sunlight pours down through giant openings and turns the underground into something paradoxical. Forests have taken root in those shafts of brightness. Trees climb upward from the cave floor. Moist air gathers into drifting mist. Clouds can form within the chamber, as if weather has chosen to live there. What should have been an empty void becomes a second ecosystem, hidden beneath the first. That doubleness gives Son Doong its power. It is not only subterranean, but generative. It reminds us that the earth is not divided neatly into surface and below, life and stone, known and unknown. Sometimes those categories dissolve. Sometimes the underground is not a place where the world ends, but where it quietly starts over. And perhaps that is why the cave feels so profound to those who enter it. It reveals that discovery is not always the finding of an object. Sometimes it is the encounter with a scale of reality that restores our sense of proportion. In a world so vast beneath our feet, what else might still be growing in the darkness, waiting not to be conquered, but simply noticed? What kind of city continues beneath the one tourists think they know? Paris is often imagined in light, river reflections, cafe windows, stone facades glowing at dusk. It is a city associated with elegance, conversation, and the visible performance of culture. Yet beneath that surface lies another Paris, one shaped not by boulevards, but by absence. Quarries emptied the ground below the city for centuries, carving a maze of tunnels that would later take on a second and far more intimate purpose. When burial grounds above became unsustainable, the dead were carried downward. What followed was both practical and unsettling. Bones from overcrowded cemeteries were transferred into the old quarry passages and arranged along the walls in patterns that feel at once ceremonial and deeply disquieting. Skulls and long bones became structure, decoration, warning, memorial. The catacombs were born not from a fascination with death, but from the pressures of urban life, sanitation, and limited space. Yet necessity did not erase symbolism. It amplified it. To walk those tunnels is to feel how thin the line can be between infrastructure and ritual. The city above hums with appetite and reinvention. The city below speaks in a quieter register. It reminds visitors that every metropolis is layered with generations it no longer sees, and that beneath civic beauty, there is often a long negotiation with mortality. Beyond the public passages, the network stretches much farther, into sections unofficial, unmapped, and constantly reimagined by those who enter them. There another story emerges of hidden gatherings, improvised art, and people drawn not only by rebellion, but by the desire to inhabit forgotten space. Even underground, human beings make culture. That may be the catacombs' most enduring lesson. They are not merely a repository of bones. They are a mirror held beneath the city, reflecting what urban life prefers not to dwell on. That every civilization is built above what it has displaced, and every beautiful present stands, quite literally, on the remains of its past. When we descend into such a place, are we exploring history, or finally admitting how close it has always been? What does time build when no human eye is there to hurry it? Deep beneath the desert of northern Mexico, beyond the ordinary reach of heat and daylight, a sealed chamber once waited in total darkness. It remained untouched for so long that human history, in comparison, feels almost brief. Then miners broke through, and their lamps revealed a scene so improbable, It seemed to belong to science fiction rather than geology. A cavern crowded with immense crystals, some longer than a bus, pale and translucent, crossing the chamber like frozen beams of light. This was the Crystal Cave of Naica, and it did not feel made for us. The formations grew in mineral-rich water, heated by magma below, under conditions so stable that centuries were not enough to explain them. These crystals required spans of time that strained the imagination. They were not sudden miracles, but the result of patient accumulation, molecule by molecule in perfect stillness. The cave had become a place where the earth practiced a kind of artistry beyond speed, beyond spectacle, beyond any need to be seen. And yet to see it was to confront a paradox. The chamber was magnificent, but almost uninhabitable. Extreme heat and suffocating humidity turned each human visit into an ordeal measured in minutes. Researchers entered with specialized equipment, knowing the body itself could not negotiate long with that environment. Beauty, in this case, offered no welcome. It existed on its own terms. That independence is what makes Naica so moving. We often speak as though discovery completes a thing, as though naming it somehow draws it into the human story. But the crystals were complete before we arrived. They had no need for witness. Even after the cave was flooded again and disappeared from reach, their slow growth continued in darkness, indifferent to fascination, theft, or loss. Perhaps that is the real revelation such a place offers. The world is not waiting to be admired in order to become extraordinary. It already is. And somewhere beyond our access, beyond our comfort, beyond our brief occupation of the surface, time is still making wonders with a patience we will never possess. What compels a civilization to build downward instead of up? In the soft volcanic landscape of Cappadocia, the answer once took the form of a city hidden beneath a house. A wall was open, a passage appeared, then another, then steps descending into rooms, shafts, storage spaces, and deeper corridors that seemed to deny any ordinary idea of shelter. What emerged from that accidental rediscovery was not a cellar or a refuge in the simple sense, but Derinkuyu, an underground city of astonishing depth and complexity. To descend through it is to enter a logic shaped by danger, discipline, and remarkable foresight. Ventilation shafts carried air through multiple levels. Wells provided water, spaces were organized for sleeping, worship, food storage, animals, communal life, and defense. Massive stone doors could seal passageways from within, turning the city into a layered stronghold beneath the open countryside. The deeper one imagines it, the more difficult it becomes not to marvel. This was not improvisation. It was a planning on the scale of a hidden civilization. And yet the most powerful aspect of Derinkuyu may be its emotional meaning. An underground city is more than an engineering achievement. It is a statement about vulnerability. It tells us that there were times when safety could not be trusted to walls above ground, when continuity required retreat, concealment, and the ability to preserve community in darkness. Families did not descend there merely to survive individually. They descended to remain a society. That is what makes the place feel so modern despite its age. Beneath the carved stone lies a familiar hope, that even in unstable times there might be a way to protect what is essential: food, water, prayer, learning, children, memory. The architecture of Derinkuyu suggests that resilience is not only about strength, it is also about design, cooperation, and the refusal to let fear erase daily life. So the city leaves us with a question larger than archaeology. When people build a world beneath the world, are they hiding from history or preserving the fragile things history always threatens to take away? What do we really discover when we uncover something ancient? The past itself, or the limits of our own assumptions? Derinkuyu does not stand alone. Across Cappadocia, the land is threaded with other underground complexes, smaller cities, tunnels, chambers, and hidden connections, suggesting that what was found beneath one home belonged to a much broader human strategy. The region's soft rock made excavation possible, but possibility alone does not explain the result. Many landscapes are workable. Few become entire subterranean networks capable of sustaining life below the reach of danger. This is where wonder must make room for humility. Modern people often flatter themselves with the idea that complexity belongs mainly to the present. We look backward and imagine earlier societies as narrower in ambition, limited in engineering, constrained by superstition or simple tools. Then a place like this emerges from the earth and quietly corrects us. It reminds us that intelligence did not begin with modernity. Planning, adaptation, structural insight, and communal coordination have deep roots. Our ancestors solved problems with what they had, and sometimes their solutions were so effective that they still unsettle our confidence centuries later. But there is another layer to that correction. The underground cities do not merely display technical skill. They reveal a worldview in which survival was collective. Ventilation mattered because everyone needed air. Storage mattered because famine could reach a whole community. Passageways, wells, sealed doors, and hidden rooms were not luxuries. They were expressions of a shared fate. In the architecture itself, one can feel a social philosophy. No one remains safe alone for very long. Perhaps that is why these buried worlds continue to resonate. They are not just mysteries of stone. They are arguments about what human beings are capable of when pressure becomes a way of life. The question is no longer only who carved these spaces or how. It is also whether we, with all our visible technology, still remember how to build for endurance, for interdependence, and for futures we pray never arrive. Sometimes the past survives not to impress us, but to ask whether we have grown wiser or merely more comfortable on the surface. What do all these hidden places say when considered together? A sealed subway platform beneath a restless city, a wartime tunnel cut by hand through unforgiving soil, a desert town that moved underground to escape the sun, sacred wells opening into drowned caverns, an ice cave growing in silence, chapels carved from salt, a chamber so vast it carries its own weather, bones arranged beneath boulevards, crystals forming beyond the limit of human endurance, a city beneath Anatolian stone, built to keep a people alive. At first they seem unrelated, scattered across geography and history like separate marvels. But the deeper we look, the more they begin to speak in the same voice. That voice is not one of conquest, it is one of adaptation. Again and again, the underground appears when the surface becomes unstable, insufficient, or incomplete. Human beings descend for many reasons: to hide, to prey, to mine, to preserve, to search for water, to escape heat, to survive war, to satisfy curiosity. And yet beneath those practical motives lies something more enduring. We go below not only because the earth contains resources or shelter, but because it confronts us with scale. In the underground, our certainty changes size. Down there, time feels different. The usual markers disappear. No sunrise resets the mine. No horizon promises direction. Stone, salt, water, and ice become the dominant language. Human intention must negotiate with matter that is older, slower, and less concerned with us than we are with ourselves. This can feel unsettling, but it can also be clarifying. The underground strips away the illusion that the visible world is the whole world. Perhaps that is why these places stay with us. They turn geography into philosophy. They remind us that reality is layered, that much of what shapes life remains out of sight, and that wonder often begins where control ends. To descend is to encounter not only hidden chambers in the earth, but hidden dimensions of human character: ingenuity, fear, devotion, resilience, and awe. And so before we return to daylight, one final thought lingers. Maybe the worlds below matter so much because they reveal a truth the surface lets us ignore. That depth, in every sense, has always been part of what it means to be human. And so we return to the surface changed, even if nothing around us appears different. The streets still carry traffic, cities still glow at night, deserts still shimmer in heat, forests still move with wind and shadow. Yet after a journey through the hidden architecture of the earth, the ordinary world no longer feels entirely complete. We know now that beneath familiar ground, there may be another history, another climate, another record of human longing or geological patience waiting in silence. That may be the deepest lesson these underground worlds offer. They remind us that reality is never exhausted by first impressions. Beneath what seems settled, there can be vastness. Beneath what seems empty, there can be memory. Beneath what seems permanent, there can be older structures holding the weight of everything above. The world is not only broader than we imagine, it is deeper, and we are deeper too. Because every place we visited, whether shaped by nature or by human hands, carried the same quiet message. People have always lived in conversation with uncertainty. They have hidden from war, carved beauty out of labor, prayed in darkness, adapted to impossible climates, and entered dangerous spaces simply to understand what lay beyond the known. Curiosity and survival, fear and imagination, science and reverence. These have never been separate for very long. They meet most honestly where certainty runs out. Perhaps that is why hidden places matter so much in an age that prides itself on exposure and information. They preserve a necessary humility. They tell us that the planet still contains mysteries not because it has failed to be explained, but because wonder is not a problem to be solved. It is a relationship, a way of meeting the unknown without reducing it too quickly into ownership. So the next time you walk across a city street, a field, a mountain path, or the floor of your own home, pause for a moment and imagine the unseen below. Not as fantasy, but as a quiet fact. Chambers, tunnels, water, salt, ice, bones, breath, time. And ask yourself this: if so much of the world's truth has always lived beneath the surface, what else in our lives might deserve a deeper look before we decide we have understood it?